Welcome to Geek the Movie Talk, the series where I sit down and talk about films. And on this edition of Geek the Movie Talk, I want to focus not really just on films, but on filmmakers, specifically one filmmaker in particular. Talking about James Wan. The Conjuring 2, as of this recording, should still be in most theaters. I have a review up on the channel, so you can check it out. Really surprised at the feedback I've gotten from that review. I didn't expect that many people to really, it was one of the most viewed movie reviews I've ever done. Surprised the hell out of me. So this movie's getting a following, and James Wan has had a following for a long time, and on this edition, we're going to talk about it and really talk about, essentially, we're going to talk about, is James Wan like, did he reinvigorate the horror franchise? Is he like the top dog right now as far as mainstream horror directors go and things of that nature? So joining me, first of all, I'm going to introduce them. A voice you've heard many times before on Geek the Movie Talk. Mark, also known as Real to Real. Hello, Mark.
Hey, Geekdom. Really nice to be here again. Thank you for having me.
Always, bro. And also joining us, very special guest from BloodyDisgusting.com. He wrote an article about this called James Wan is the most important horror director of the last 20 years. Not a question mark, a statement. Please welcome Trace.
Hi, happy to be here.
Yes. All right. Now, I will put a link to Trace's article down below in the description. I want everybody to go check that out, all about James Wan. And really, it's kind of a little mini career retrospective on James Wan. Now, I'm going to pull the curtain back a little bit here. Real to Real, you have not seen The Conjuring 2, correct?
I have not, so I won't be commenting on that, but I am familiar and have seen all of James Wan's previous work.
Okay, I just want to say that because I don't want to get into too many spoilers on Conjuring 2 because there are reviews out there, and if you're watching this movie, if you're watching this podcast video, whatever, and you have the thing about James Wan movies, all of them is that you really want to avoid spoilers. And the thing about James Wan movies, which I want to get into with Trace here, is that, and I've stressed this to just about everybody, you need to see these things in theaters. You cannot wait for the home release unless you have one of those decked out 16.1 surround sound home theater setups. You're never going to get to really experience a James Wan movie like it is in the theater, because the way that this guy, the way he sets up his movies with sound, with the darkness of the theater, the fact that you're not really at home, I feel adds a layer to his movies being better. Honestly, The Conjuring was a freaking amazing experience in the theater, and when I saw it the second time at home, it wasn't the same. I still love the movie, but it still will never, like, when I walked out of that theater like shaking as to how great it was. Not because I was scared or anything, because I'm a grown-ass man, but still, it hit me. So, Trace, do you agree with that? Do you think that these films need to be experienced in the theater more than anything?
I think his recent films do, specifically starting with Insidious and moving onward, because I think that's where sound design really started playing more of a point in his films. I don't think his earlier work, Saw or Dead Silence, I mean, well, I like Saw a lot, and I think Dead Silence is a fun, goofy movie. I don't think a theater viewing is mandatory, but yes, his recent films, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like with Saw, when they actually kind of came in there, it wasn't necessarily supposed to be. Sound didn't drive that film. Nothing audio based. Really, just the psychological horror of not seeing all this horrific stuff that you're imagining was the thing driving it. And you can really see that in the way not only he shot the film, but also the way he just had to basically stitch it together at the end with the whole rapid fire shots of like the camera and everything else. That was more of a visual experience than anything else.
Well, and it's interesting. Sorry, it's interesting that you mentioned that it leaves a lot to the imagination, because the first Saw does leave a lot to the imagination. Mm-hmm. It's not a super gory movie like the sequels are, and people remember it as being a super gory movie.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's like the Chainsaw Massacre theorem, huh? People remember that movie being gory, and it really wasn't that gory. The original one, the Tobe Hooper one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's the thing. When you look at this guy James Wan's career, obviously Saw was his big, I guess, break or whatever you want to call it. The thing about Saw, you mentioned in the article, Trace, that it was kind of funny. You said that the Saw franchise kind of became synonymous with torture porn, but the first Saw, dude, the first Saw is one of those movies, man, where the great movies, like look at the great all-time movies, like of all time, like, you know, just the best made movies are the ones that every time you watch it, you pick up on new things. And Saw is one of those movies where you watch it 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times, and you will always find something new. It really is a brilliant freaking movie. The first one, it was really like it fucks with you. It really does.
I definitely think one of the things is really interesting with his career is obviously with the original Saw and Insidious and Dead Silence and stuff, you really can't necessarily talk about James Wan without talking about Leigh Whannell. And I know that those two crafted the story together, but it's just such a well-oiled film. The original Saw is such because those guys were very passionate. You can listen to old interviews of them talking about how they kind of came up with the idea, and it's like, well, what if we just wrote a movie? I write a movie so I can star in it and you can direct. I mean, that's a passion project through and through. You can see it in the Saw .5, like the short film they made in order to sell it to Twisted Pictures and everything. It's a very intricate film. It not necessarily, I think he has definitely taken those lessons from those original films and been able to kind of step away from his that old partnership. Although I don't think it's because of friendship. They haven't worked together in a couple of years in terms of a creativity thing, have they?
Well, James Wan did a cameo in Insidious 3. That was what?
Yeah,
last year, I think, or 2 years ago.
I know that they're still friends and they work together. But my point is they're not writing. They have nothing on the dock to like actually work on together, writing, directing, or anything else.
Yeah, the last one was Insidious Chapter 2 and that was 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, about James Wan, the thing about his career so far, and again, this guy's got, knock on wood, he's got a long career still left. He's 39. He's still a pretty young guy. When I look at it, he's never made a bad movie. I don't think he's made a movie you can consider a, quote, bad movie. And when you look at how he kind of started in this horror genre and then kind of segued into action, it really, and he went from essentially these really psychological, well-made horror films into like Fast and Furious 7, which made so much freaking money. This guy doesn't even have to make a movie ever again. But hey, it's whatever. I think every movie he does is a passion project. You can tell when you watch, even up until The Conjuring 2. When you watch Conjuring 2, which I think is, now looking back, probably not as good as the first one. I think Conjuring 2 still has so much love. The way this guy does shots, again, without going into spoilers, the way that he sets up his shots as a director is so, like, meticulous. There's little things on the side that you notice, the scenes where the camera's going up the stairs. He's not afraid to try new things. And honestly, he reminds me of like a John Carpenter. Now, obviously, Carpenter's first movie wasn't Halloween, but some people think that Halloween's like the greatest horror film ever made. Some people think that, and you know what? That's a good opinion. I can't argue that because it's a great freaking movie. And I feel like, you have Halloween and 100 sequels that John Carpenter wasn't even involved in. Not really. And then you've got Saw.
Well,
and then that,
he wrote the second one, though.
Yeah, he wrote the second one, but yeah, after that, it was just wackiness.
Yeah.
And there's rumors he might come back for the new one. That's what we have been hearing.
Is it producing? Not to get way off topic.
I will believe it when I see it. With anything, I mean, that's the rumor. With anything like that, I'm just like, you know what? As soon as it goes into production, I'll believe it.
Right, yeah. But no, I think that even though Wan has never made like a Precinct 13 movie or anything like that, I do still think that there are some comparisons to be made there because, I remember when he got the gig in Furious 7, people thought that, some people I talked to were like, well, can he really do it? He's never done a movie like this before. And he did because I think he put so much love into it. And on top of that, he had one of the stars die during the filmmaking process. I mean, that could totally screw with you psychologically no matter who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think in terms of where it comes from, it's not that he's just passionate. Maybe Trace can speak to this, but I think it's because he comes from this horror genre, getting things done really quickly, obviously, and for very little money. He's learned meticulously how to, like I said before, stitch these films together and just make, come hell or high water, he's going to make it work.
Trace?
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, and it's if you ever see James Wan in an interview, he's so giddy all the time, and it's clear that he loves what he does. But what he has that a lot of directors and writers don't is a lot of creative control. I don't know who he bribed, but I mean, the studios leave him alone. They're like, here's the money, do what you do. So that's why a lot of his films turn out so well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's a topic for a different show that we're probably going to end up doing too, about studios versus filmmakers. There's a whole bunch of, there's a whole history behind that with Coppola and them, but nonetheless, I'm glad you brought that up too, because yeah, he goes in there, does Furious 7. He's booked to do Aquaman. That's going to be his next big movie. I'm not skeptical. I really think he can pull it off. And Aquaman, to me, in my opinion, has never been that interesting of a character. They've never actually done like a live action Aquaman film ever, so he's going into uncharted waters. But I think he can pull it off. I really do. And I think you're right. I think James Wan, and Trace, I want to get your thoughts on this too. I think he's part of that crop of these new directors. And not new like, when I say new, I mean the last like 15, 20 years. Not new like last 3 years, where these guys grew up fans of movies, love films. I mean, he's talked about how much Jaws influenced him, and you can kind of tell when you watch Conjuring and Insidious, because the first hour of Conjuring 1 is just build up, which I love, because I felt that the horror genre on the mainstream scale was kind of doing the whole relying on boo scares. And then we had like there was that whole weird time period where they were adapting Japanese horror movies like Ringu. Remember that whole time where it was like everything was like from Japan? And now we have James Wan come in there and kind of go back to basics. And the point I'm trying to make here is that you can tell this guy is a student of the game, especially with Insidious 2. Insidious 2 is like a mixture of you've got like Kubrick's The Shining with Patrick Wilson losing his mind. You've got a little bit of Back to the Future Part 2 in there with the time travel thing. Just there's so much like love of movies that you can see in everything he does.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and oh God, I was going somewhere with this. Continue talking. I'll come back.
No, I was actually going to ask you about that, about some of his influences, because you can just tell there's Hitchcock in there, and just wanted to ask you about, basically, do you think that this is the kind of filmmaker that we need more guys like this that have that love of movies, but also can retain control, and the studio gives them trust?
Well, okay, so what I like about Wan's films is that I don't necessarily think he reinvents the wheel in terms of scares, but I think he spins the wheel very well. And like you mentioned about the jump scares, I'm one of those dumbasses that reads the comment section on my articles, and I see people criticize Wan for utilizing jump scares too much. But what I like about those films, and I think jump scares are cheap, Wan does like artsy jump scares. He subverts your expectations really well, and I noticed this specifically during The Conjuring 2, where there's a camera angle and you're like, okay, well, a jump scare is coming, because that horror films always use this angle and something always happens when this angle happens. But he doesn't do it. He waits.
Yep.
And he employs, and then he'll have a jump scare, but it comes later and not when you expect it. And that is a good jump scare. And I think Insidious is the very same thing, but I think both films use imagery a lot more than most mainstream horror films do.
I just want to jump in about that, because it reminded me so much of this one shot in Insidious. And it's just a plain old jump scare. It's not very scary when you start thinking about it, but it's just one of these things where, what did I just watch? How did he just trick me like this? Where the wife, I can't remember the actress's name,
Rose Byrne.
Yes, she's sitting there and she sees a figure walking outside the window on the patio, and she
Mm.
gets up and she walks, and then that figure just is right in the foreground, just like passes, and you're like, "What the hell just happened?" And it's
Yeah.
shocking. Or when she's following the boy, and this is like something nobody notices in the original. Go back and watch it. The scene where she's following the boy into the new house, and as she walks into the laundry room, the boy is just standing there, facing the wall back towards her as she moves through, doesn't notice, and the audience like hardly ever notices that shot. And it's
That is
creepy
one of
as
my
hell.
that's one of my favorite moments in any horror movie in recent memory is that laundry room shot because he doesn't focus on it. He just trusts that a keen viewer will catch it.
Mhm.
And that's what makes it scary. And that's what I think is important about Juan is that he trusts his audience.
Yeah,
Whereas a lot of horror filmmakers feel like they need to hold your hand.
exactly, bro. I agree with everything you're saying, and it's funny because you mentioned that he trusts his audience, and the beautiful thing about it is if you miss it the first time, you'll catch the second time, or maybe your
Hmm.
friend who's watching it with you will tell you. And I want to talk about real quick that what you mentioned earlier, Trace, about the way that he kind of played with the audience. I think this guy's a real master. This guy's a true, and I'm gonna put him over, dude. He really is a true student of the game, a real master of his craft. In Conjuring 2. Not really a spoiler. There's that whole scene where the girls are telling the mother about the haunting or whatever. And we've seen so many horror movies throughout the years where it's the cliche thing where I'm watching the film and I'm already familiar with the Enfield story, right? But obviously there's going to be
Hmm.
changes. And there's that whole thing where I'm thinking, I'm rolling my eyes. I'm like, it's gonna be the movie where the kids see the ghost, the parents don't believe them until the very end. Then all of a sudden, you're seeing the shot where the mom's like, "Whatever, you guys are lying." And then all of a sudden, boom, the dresser goes across the room, and I'm like, "Whoa!" Like that's how you do a jump
Yeah.
scare because the shot is such a natural kind of you think he's gonna set you up for a jump scare. He doesn't do it. So then you all of a sudden you're kind of like chilling, you're emotionally like kind of like, all right, well, and then you start thinking to yourself, especially if you're a horror guy, okay, we're gonna get that whole subplot with the kids and the parents, and then all of a sudden when the dresser flies by, you're like, okay, this guy just totally took that cliche and threw it out the window. I love
Well,
that scene so much.
I agree, and there are two things I want to touch on. One is a Conjuring 2. It's not a plot point though, so it's not a spoiler. But there's a shot where the camera pans out of the house, and it shows two windows in the entire frame. The right window, like one of the sons is like looking out the window, and and this is maybe just like the film student in me, but I'm like, okay, well, there's going to be a ghost on the left window that like comes into the frame and like looks out the window. Like, there's no reason for that window to be in this frame and Juan holds the shot for like I want to say 10 seconds of just the two windows and the boy looking out one of the windows and nothing happens. It just moves to the next scene. And I love that restraint because as an avid horror movie watcher, I expected something to happen in this shot. And then
He
the other thing I
jerks you
wanted
around. He jerks you around.
yes, and it's
Right?
great. And the other thing I want to touch on was, and this may also be a contributor of Lee Winnell of Insidious, where the haunted house. Why don't they move out? Blah 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 blah.
Mhm.
Oh, it's because they do leave the house in that movie, and the kid's the one that's haunted. But that's the workaround, and that again, a creative way of getting over a played out horror trope.
Mhm.
And
That
it's
that was brilliant. It was just so brilliant.
And it's interesting when you compare like The Conjuring to Insidious, both films, or all four films, or five really if you count Chapter 2. But Juan didn't do that one; he didn't direct it. But still, Lee Winnell did. The point I'm trying to make is when you look at The Conjuring, obviously what they did was they took the case files of Ed and Lorraine Warren, and of course they embellished them because the Enfield story does not really end the way it did in the film with Valak and that stuff. There's no real documented information on that from what I've seen. Valak is a whole different thing. And then, of course, The Conjuring 1, I mean, it's a movie. You have to add a little bit of drama, a little bit of spice. But but they're very grounded in like, I think part of the reason why Conjuring worked so well is there's something about that whole based on a true story thing that gets to people. And I think there's that curiosity. I think it's always worked out that way. But with Conjuring, especially the first one, the second one was a little, and they kind of screwed this up a little bit, in my opinion, but the first one did it better where there's that whole sense of realism. Like when you leave the theater, you can say, okay, maybe this really did happen, even if you're a skeptic. Whereas, but it's of course it's grounded in reality. Whereas with Insidious, both Juan and Wanell created this world, like the Insidious story, where with going into the further and these demonic beings that try to possess you. I mean, that idea has been done before, but this kind of universe where there's like an alternate dimension existing on the current dimension where there's no space and time, like that kind of stuff is just all just Leigh Whannell and James Wan just coming up with their own thing.
Mm-hmm. I feel like I do want to kind of touch on this part because I think it's actually really important, especially when you talk about James Wan, not only his past career, but his current career and where he's going to go in the future. Because we've seen a lot of directors in the past, especially horror directors, go on to do much bigger and better things. Obviously, Wan has done Furious 7, like you said before. He's going to be doing Aquaman next. If that comes together, I mean, there are rumors flying around everywhere that there's just so much turmoil going on over at DC, but that's another video.
It's a whole other freaking story.
Yeah.
It's a whole other video. The thing is here's something I think is incredibly interesting about James Wan and potentially his greater future as a horror director / producer is I feel like with Lights Out coming on fairly soon here and all of his stuff, and he's acted as a producer on all the Saw films after the first one.
Are you going to talk about how he's created like 3 cinematic universes now?
No, not
That's
cinematic.
That's pretty much what he's doing, yeah.
That I feel like I know he has taken like basically he is. At least with the Saw franchise and now The Conjuring, I think, and you can argue Insidious, but I think it's even less so. But you can argue that he has reinvented the horror genre, one person twice in the last decade, or 12 years or so. But my thought is he, one thing a lot of people aren't talking about to me is we're seeing with The Conjuring basically the beginnings. What Warner Brother wants to do with The Conjuring, the beginnings of a freaking with the Warrens, they're these files and stuff. You do Conjuring movies, but then you branch it off into Annabelle, and now they're talking about doing
cinematic universes. Yeah,
they're talking about The Nun and everything. And whether he goes on to direct The Conjuring 3 and then kind of steps off and becomes the shepherd of this quote-unquote cinematic universe of horror, I just think that's interesting. And then he goes on and does blockbusters from then on. We don't know.
Yeah. I mean, well, I don't necessarily think I don't want to say reinvented the genre, but he's given it like an adrenaline shot to the heart twice. Because,
Insidious is its own thing.
Well, and see, I actually love Insidious. I actually prefer, even though I do think that The Conjuring is a better movie, I like Insidious more than I like The Conjuring. But I think that The Conjuring was more of a shot in the arm to horror than Insidious was. But Insidious was a great example of PG-13 horror done well.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And the thing about him, too, Leigh Whannell, as a storyteller, because I think this is the most underrated part. Because we could sit here and talk about the way he does his shots and the way he does pacing, the way he does sound, the way he does build up. The point is, the bottom line, I try to simplify things because I talk to a lot of cinephiles. A lot of them, okay? And cinephiles, I love talking about movies. Even especially with people who are smarter than me, but I do think that sometimes they're too smart for their own good. So, and I'll preface that by saying this: all that matters is how good the movie actually is, and the guy makes good movies, point blank. And that's I think the reason that I think a lot of people are forgetting this. They focus a lot on the technical aspects, is that the guy has great characters. When you watch Insidious, you actually care about the Lamberts. When you watch Conjuring, you care about the Warrens. You actually, and of course, a lot of it is Patrick Wilson, the performances, you can't take that away from the actors, but this guy, James Wan, in his movies, he makes you care, whereas I think there's so many horror films, not that it's a horrible thing, but I think that there's so many movies that I think you really don't care about the actual characters. They never give you enough time to really get to know the characters, which is important. Why Wan's movies have that great first act. I'll bring up a good point real quick. A good example, in my opinion, is It Follows. Now, It Follows got a lot of hype. I enjoyed watching it, but I couldn't care less about the characters. Maybe it was just me. I just did not connect with them.
I disagree.
Did you? That's okay.
I thought, because I can understand where you're coming from, but I think that those felt like real teenagers to me, and they were more authentic. But maybe that's why people didn't like them, because teenagers in general aren't that likable.
You're right.
I feel like
That's
whether or not they did feel like real teenagers, although just hand to God, the one thing I was thinking about the entire time was, are they in high school or are they in college? And I really just, honestly, there was nothing in there to indicate one thing or another, although I bet they were in high school to me. And I don't know why I spent that much time thinking about it when I should have been focusing on everything else. But when it comes to It Follows, a lot of people had a lot of problems with the way they decided to take out the monster and just dropping all the electronics in the pool. It was so stupid or anything, but I agree with Trace. It's just, that's what I would you would just think of something really stupid to do.
And the director actually responded to that criticism, and he said they're kids, like they're not smart. They thought they came up with a Scooby-Doo plan to kill this thing that can't be killed. And that's what it was. Like, I'm sorry. And I totally get behind that.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? You're spot on about your notes about the teenagers, because I think probably because I'm a little bit older, I'm kind of past my teenage years. I love being a teenager, but with Wan movies, a lot of it is that family bond and the familial bond being interrupted by these demonic forces, I think works, which actually brings me to my next point and my next question for both you guys. I'm going to start with Mark and then go to Trace. My question is, okay, we've seen, several films from James Wan. We've already talked about them, Saw, and then the more recent ones. A lot of them are getting very similar. Now, I still love them. I liked Conjuring 2 a lot. I liked Conjuring 1. I even liked Insidious 3, even though it wasn't James Wan. I still liked it. Got a lot of pan, but I didn't think it was that bad. I had a good time watching it.
It got better reviews than Insidious 2.
Which is weird, because I really liked Insidious 2. I thought Insidious 2 is a great example of James Wan saying, okay, we have this first movie, let's tell a great story. And I love the fact that Insidious 2 had that whole, they're looking for information on Crane, and they have to kind of unravel this puzzle, and I love that movie.
Insidious 2 does not work that well on its own, but it works really well when
with the first one.
Immediately after the first movie.
Halloween 1 and 2.
Yes, exactly.
Hellraiser 1 and 2.
Hellraiser 1 and 2, and then 3 goes elsewhere.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is most films, when you think about...
Not Nightmare 1 and 2, though. That's totally different.
Well, Nightmare 1 and 3 work pretty well together.
Well,
but
3 and 4. 3 and 4 kind of did.
Well, 3 and 4 work at immediate, or as we were talking about earlier, I just like to geek out. Is Saw 4 through 6 is just, or 4 through 7 really is just a continuation, just one continuous story.
Yeah.
So what was the original question?
Well, yeah. I'm sorry. So the question was, okay. The question was, he's going into his trick bag. How many more movies do you think that Wan can do before he runs out of tricks? In other words, it's becoming okay, I love the movies. He always surprises me, but I every time I watch James Wan movie, I'm like, okay, how many more horror movies will he do where he does kind of the same thing? What else can you do at this point?
I was talking about that a little earlier. I think one thing we're going to see from him, and I think he'll come back, like you said, I think he has a whole lot of passion, a whole lot of tangible ideas that can make great horror movies, and he's one of those guys who will probably just brew on an idea for a really long time before he comes back. I mean, look how long he waited to do from the Saw film, and then he did Dead Silence, and then Death Sentence, and then he just kind of waited and did Insidious years after, because he took that long to kind of either come up with an idea or was trying to do something else. I think what we're going to see is that he is going to go ahead and start directing other films. He's talked about it in the past. He's talked about, okay, I need to go out and I need to do other films. I need to do big budget films or something, or smaller films, my passion projects. And he's going to be a producer. This guy, like he already has started to become, is going to start becoming that executive produced by. This guy's going to come out and find top talent that is new and budding in the industry, and he's going to help shepherd these people in the next generation of filmmakers. I think that's just my personal opinion.
Trace, what do you think?
Well, he's already, because Lights Out's coming out next month, and he's producing that. But then he did Demonic, and that has yet to see a release. I think that all it takes is a change of subgenre. Both Insidious and The Conjuring, are like that supernatural horror. I really like The Conjuring 2, but The Conjuring 2 felt more like an Insidious movie than it did like the first Conjuring.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that if he tackles a different subgenre of horror, of which there are many, then it would be easy. Now, do I want him to do The Conjuring 3? Yeah, sure, that'd be great. But I wouldn't mind seeing him get out of his supernatural horror, because even Dead Silence was supernatural horror. Saw is his only like quote unquote realistic horror film. Maybe that's the wrong, because Conjuring's realistic, but it's ghosts and like hauntings and stuff. I think he just needs a new subgenre. But he'll go off and do Aquaman, and maybe he'll do something else and then come back to horror. But I remember when he did Insidious 2, like he said he was like, I don't want to say that the phrase was that he was done with horror, but he said he was leaving horror.
Yeah.
And we thought he wasn't going to come back, and then The Conjuring happened.
Yes. And it's interesting because you mentioned other subgenres. I'm just thinking to myself, okay, James Wan doing a zombie movie. Like he's so good at doing, like you said, spiritual kind of haunted house, exorcism movies. And then you think about him coming back and doing something like a zombie movie, or maybe even like a classic slasher, like a Friday the 13th. And I think he could do it,
Yeah, because slasher is my favorite subgenre of horror, aquatic horror being my second favorite. So if he could either do some killer fish movie or a slasher movie, I would be very pleased.
Well, he's a big fan of Jaws, so I could totally see him doing a great fish movie.
Well, if he works in some kind of great white shark killing someone in Aquaman, I'll call it a success.
I think we're going to see that. Maybe some piranhas. Piranhas would be great, too.
Yes, exactly.
Where's the electric eel movie at? We haven't seen that yet. I'm sure it's out there, but all right. Well, we'll all kind of be waiting in anticipation to see what's going to happen with James Wan's career. But really, I've never seen a Wan movie that I didn't like. And honestly, obviously, you're going to have your favorites. Everybody likes. Everybody has their favorites, but I've never seen a movie where I've sat there and said, this sucks. I've never seen one from him. And I think that these movies, all of them that he's done so far, have repeat viewing, especially the ones that we focused on today, which is Saw, the first one, and the Insidious and Conjuring movies. So, Trace and Mark, do you guys have any final thoughts before we get out of here?
I think that anyone who's listening is going to say, well, wait, what about Dead Silence? And I think
it didn't get enough love, did it? Yeah.
Well, and I mean, I don't know how much you'll know about that movie, but that was they were forced to make that movie. When they were doing Saw, their agent or someone was like, you need to have something else on hold in case Saw flops. And Lee Winnell didn't have any ideas. So he locked himself in their apartment because they were living together at the time and churned that movie out. And then they made it before Saw blew up. And I think it's kind of evident in that film, but I think that even under the circumstances, that movie turned out probably way better than it should have. And I think that's a testament to Wan.
Is that one of the reasons? If they made that before Saw blew up, is that one of the reasons the Wahlberg brother is in Saw 2?
It might be.
Yeah,
it might be.
It might be. I do have one thing for all the people who have listened this far. I would like to see in the comment section people tell us what subgenre of horror they would like to see James Wan tackle next. I think that is an interesting question.
Yeah.
That would be an interesting question. It's like I feel like this guy can do anything, but then I'm thinking to myself, like, what if he did it's not really horror, but some people are horrified. If he did like a Godzilla movie, like, what would they think about that? I feel like there's so much. because the way he does his camera work and his storytelling, I think that he could bring those talents to other genre. So again, I do agree with Trace on that for sure. Yeah, I actually need to go back and rewatch Dead Silence because I know it's on Netflix right now, and it's like his, I guess you can call it his sleeper. Like people
It's
often,
silly.
yeah, people often just forget it exists. I didn't, but people do, right? But please, everybody, go check out the article on BladeDiscussing.com about James Wan, and we look forward to hopefully more articles from Trace. I'm fairly certain.
Oh,
Right?
can you tell them what you were working on before we did this call?
Yes.
Oh,
Exciting.
I did an hour-long interview with Eric Heiserer, who he actually wrote the upcoming Lights Out that came out. It's coming out next month. But he's most well known for writing the screenplays of the Nightmare on Elm Street remake and the Thing prequel, remake, reboot thing from 2011, and Final Destination 5, what is arguably the best sequel in that franchise.
Oh yeah.
Or prequel, spoiler alert. But yeah, so yeah, that'll be coming out probably closer to Lights Out's release, which is on July 22nd. But it's going to be a long one where I kind of go through his entire career, and he's very open about his experiences, both good and bad. So it's definitely a very interesting conversation.
And this will be on BloodyDisgusting.com, right?
Yeah, it'll be on BloodyDisgusting.com. I think it's going to be one long article. I was originally going to split it up and do like one article like per movie in his career, but I'm just going to kind of combine it into one.
That's gonna be great. I can't wait.
Yes, definitely check that out. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks everybody for checking out Geek the Movie Talk, and we'll see what's in the future. Like I said, Aquaman should be next for Juan. I think that might be the closest we're gonna get to like a sea movie as far as like sharks and octopuses, and we have, again, I mentioned the Electric Eel. We haven't really seen an octopus, a horror film, at least not in the mainstream. So I'm wondering if he can tackle that because octopuses are freaking scary, dude.
There is definitely an octopus and an octopus 2, but they may have been like sci-fi movies before it became like Sharknado sci-fi, but like they were like, it was like the Beast, like monster movies. Like Octopus 1 is fun.
Well, there's also Mega Shark versus Giant Octopus.
Yeah,
the
that's
Asylum
true.
movies. So
yeah. I the original Octopus is not like an Asylum movie. It's actually like a decent movie. I mean, kind of.
All right. Well, thank you, Trace, for being here. Thank you again, Mark, and we'll talk to y'all. No, anytime. We'll talk to y'all later.